As I've said from the beginning, ours was not a campaign, but rather an incredible and great movement made up of millions of hardworking men and women who love their country and want a better, brighter future for themselves and for their family.
Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Let's Ask Wall Street Journal Potomac Watch columnist Kim Strassel, editorial board member Joe Rago, columnist Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and assistant editorial page editor James Freeman. So, Kim, welcome to New York.
Hello.
Okay, so how did Donald Trump do it?
Well, look, first of all, I think you've got to remember it was his message out there, and many of these things, you look at the people that he won in the end. A lot of union households that Hillary Clinton should have done much better on, manufacturing states, energy states. You know, this was a message to working white Americans that resonated in the end. And I think he also had some good ground game help from the RNC.
He did better among union workers than any Republican since Walter Mondale in 1984, and of course that was then Ronald Reagan rather, and that was the landslide. So you're saying was it the economic message? Is that what it was?
It was the economic message. These were left behind workers, people who believe that Washington is not working for them, and I think his policies and his promise that he would represent them in Washington flipped a lot. Look, we had some 700. Is that how many counties voted for Obama? That in the end twice. How many of those, again, flipped to?
1/3.
1/3 of them. I mean, so these are people who, they're kind of in the middle. They voted for the president before, President Obama, but they felt that that administration had not served them.
And just on that point, 13 counties in Michigan alone from 2012. That's an enormous number of counties to have flipped in one presidential cycle.
Yeah, that's true, and I agree with Kim that there was a lot of dissatisfaction amongst white working class voters, but I don't think it explains the victory. I think if you want to understand the victory, you have to first of all admit that this was a national referendum on Barack Obama, 8 years of Barack Obama, and a very weak Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton. And if you look at the white educated, college-educated voters, that number was much higher than what was anticipated in the polls. And things matter at the margin. And I think that margin was a bunch of those people who said they didn't like Trump, but looking at Hillary Clinton and looking at the last 8 years and saying, I can't take any more of this.
That's an important point. We all talked here for weeks about how college-educated Republicans might not vote for a Republican presidential nominee for the first time ever. And in fact, in the end, he won them by, what, about 4 points, something like that, Joe. So how do you see this? I mean, there's a little disagreement here on either side of you about whether it's Obama or...
oh, no, I think Obama was a big reason, too.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump broke through in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, states that Republicans for 30 years have been trying to unlock, and he did it with no money, no field organization, and so it's a remarkable achievement. It's a big shock to the U.S. political system.
But it isn't an overwhelming victory. Okay,
not at all.
He
won those states by 1%.
It's a plurality. All right, he didn't get 50%. So there was still a contingent quality to this in the sense that they're saying, well, yeah, we're rejecting what we have seen and we're rejecting the Democrat, but we're not fully embracing Donald Trump.
No, if you look at the exit polls, Mrs. Clinton has a higher favorable rating than Donald Trump. I think voters decided that he was a risk worth taking as an agent of change.
Prospect of change.
All right, James Freeman, I go to you last because you are no doubt the most celebratory here. Let me ask. I mean, where would you put your? What's your number one explanation?
Well, I'm here just miles from Mar-a-Lago, coincidentally, but I am celebrating. I think it's a moment where you can talk about the caveats of the overall popular vote and all of those things later. But for now, it is a huge victory. I think we've talked about some of it.
He
had a message. She had no message. She had basically criticisms of Donald Trump in her advertising and speeches. He was talking about economic revival to a country that was very focused on and needed economic growth. I think the repudiation of Obama is a big part of it. And you talk about confounding the experts. He, unlike Hillary Clinton, he really improved. You go from the debates last winter, where he seemed to know almost nothing about policy. You get to that last presidential debate,
and he still seemed not to know a lot about policy. James, I'm sorry.
He was beating her in a debate on constitutional jurisprudence. He actually knew what the Heller decision on the Second Amendment said. I think he really obviously confounded a lot of experts. He improved, and he had a message, and he was speaking to people that are being ignored.
Okay, Kim, what credit do you give? Joe mentioned the lack of a ground game and the lack of advertising. What credit do you give the Republican National Committee and Reince Priebus?
A lot. The more people look at this, the more this has come out. You know, the RNC had 315 field offices, 7,600 paid employees. They made 24 million home visits, 26 million calls. Just to give you a difference.
Were they better on the big data this time?
They were great on the metadata. That was an operation that they have been pouring money into the last 4 years. But just to give a comparison, in September, Trump had one field office in Florida. Hillary Clinton had 51. The RNC had 62.
Wow.
So and by the way, Reince Priebus, I think the other thing he gets credit for is there were people that wanted him to, at one point, direct more money into advertising. He kept it in the ground game. There were also people that at one point wanted him to abandon Donald Trump and go down ballot. He didn't do that. And I think that that's one reason why you now hear Mr. Trump talking about, perhaps a cabinet position.
All right, still ahead, Donald Trump's Rust Belt strategy pays off as blue-collar voters in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin help send him to the White House. We'll talk to a strategist who predicted his path to 270 next. The Rust Belt states playing a decisive role in Donald Trump's victory Tuesday as the Republican rode a surge in turnout among white working-class voters to break through Hillary Clinton's so-called blue wall in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. John Brabender is a Republican strategist and longtime advisor to former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. So, sir, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
I have to say, you kind of called this one. Were you surprised by the magnitude of the margins in these states?
Not totally surprised. For one reason is I was doing a lot of races in these states. So I was seeing sort of micro polls, if you will, state Senate races, congressional races, and even some of the Senate races. And clearly there was one thing coming out. One is I did believe there was an undercount of votes in these polls for Trump. And the reason is if you're a union member, a blue-collar conservative Democrat,
right,
you're not necessarily going to tell somebody who you don't know on the phone that I'm voting for Donald Trump. And so I did believe that that was being underestimated. Number two is we were seeing a different enthusiasm level for pro-Trump voters versus pro-Clinton voters. And then there was one other thing. If you look at sort of the exit polls, and let's hope to God those are more accurate than the national polls. But if you look at those, there was one thing that people who were dissatisfied with government, the federal government, overwhelmingly went for Trump. What that says to me is Hillary Clinton became the incumbent in this race. It was not an open race seat, and that means that if you're undecided or at the end, generally you go towards the non-incumbent. In this case, it was Trump.
Let's break down the state of Pennsylvania, which you know very, very well. And a Republican hasn't won that since, what, 1988? So
That's
a
correct.
very long time. Now, how did Trump do it if you look at the state demographically? We talked for weeks about how he was struggling in the Philadelphia suburbs. How did he do there?
Well, he did better than expected. He didn't do great. So, for example, take Bucks County, which had a really highly contested congressional district.
That's Allentown,
the 8th congressional district.
North of Philly.
Right. Well, and so the Republican ended up winning by almost 10 points. In that district, the Senate candidate, Pat Toomey, I think, won about 5 points. Donald Trump actually lost it, but not by the margins that they thought he would. So he actually recovered a little bit in the suburbs of Philadelphia, the collar counties. But then in the West, he started to roll up big numbers. A good example is Erie County.
And that's in the far west near Ohio.
right on the lake. And they have not voted for a Republican for president since 1984. It's over 60% Democrat.
Wow.
And Donald Trump won that county. And here's really the crucial part of this. You know, we talk about the gender gap, that Hillary was going to win big among women, Donald Trump was going to do well among men. Non-college educated white women voted for Donald Trump, I think on the national level, at 62%. In these Rust Belt states, he won by big margins among sort of these blue-collar, who are oftentimes conservative, but working mothers, in a sense. And I think that was the whole difference of the game. And I think as they do more analysis, they're going to understand that you cannot paint a broad brush and say, you know, here's how the female vote or the male vote's going to go. You have to look much more granular than that.
Is this a revival of the Reagan coalition of kind of blue collar voters who used to be Democrats with the traditional college educated Republicans?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. These are the sons and daughters of what we would have called as Reagan Democrats.
Right.
And what's interesting is their votes are very fluid, and they have not become pro-Republican. Let's be clear on this. They think both parties have left them on the economic battlefield. They think both parties have let them down, and they think Washington is basically corrupt.
Right.
And so when Donald Trump is talking about trade and immigration and even Obamacare, these are music to their ears, and they resonated based on that. And the biggest strategic mistake I think Hillary Clinton made is she took these voters for granted.
Okay, so was there a turnout problem for her among minority voters, particularly in Philadelphia? Because it's usually in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh where they Democrats roll up the big numbers to overwhelm Republicans in the rest of the state. Was there a lack of enthusiasm for her there compared to Obama?
Well, I would guess there wasn't as much enthusiasm, but actually the votes were there. If you look at Philadelphia, coming out of Philadelphia, she did every bit as well as Barack Obama did. That was a big surprise. They thought that she had driven up enough numbers that she was going to win. Then in the collar counties, she didn't do as well as Obama, but she did okay. If you would have just looked at those numbers, you would have thought that she would win Pennsylvania by 2 or 3 points. But then you get into some of the swing areas, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Erie that we discussed, the Scranton area, and even the city of Pittsburgh. Once you got outside the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County and the surrounding counties, Trump did extremely well. And then you get in these small rural areas and towns, overwhelmingly they voted for Trump, and it made up the big advantage that Clinton had coming out of Philadelphia.
All right, John, thank you. Fascinating stuff. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me back.
When we come back, the president-elect heads to Capitol Hill as Republican leaders vow to work together despite their differences. A look at what the new Republican majority can accomplish.
Donald Trump heard a voice out in this country that no one else heard. He connected in ways with people no one else did. He turned politics on its head. And now, Donald Trump will lead a unified Republican government. And we will work hand in hand, a positive agenda to tackle this country's big challenges.
That was House Speaker Paul Ryan Wednesday promising to work with President-elect Trump to tackle the big problems facing the country. So with Republicans taking control of the presidency and both houses of Congress for the first time in a decade, can they agree on a path forward for the party and the country? So James, first break down, why do you think that the Republicans were able to hold on to the Senate? It looks like there wasn't all that much ticket splitting in the end.
No, we saw all year where Republican, especially senators, were wondering how to deal with Trump. Do you keep your distance? Do you stay close to him? A case study, your home state of Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson made up a lot of ground, had a big comeback win running with Trump. And the way it worked is Trump voters ended up moving toward Johnson, and Johnson's voters in the southeast of the state ended up moving toward Trump.
Joe, you buy that?
No, I think, well, certainly in part. I think the Republicans who are a little bit hands-off with Trump, saying they were fine with him, they wanted him to be president, did better than the ones that renounced him. But look, Johnson ran a very good campaign on his own grounds about what he'd done for Wisconsin. I think there's more factors in play than simply affiliation with Trump or not.
So, Mary, Paul Ryan, Donald Trump meets Paul Ryan this week, meets Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell doesn't hold a press statement, as is usual. What do you think about their possibilities of working together? Are they good?
Well, I think this election proves once again that this country is not immune to populist demagogues. And but President Obama's presidency, I think, proves that that's not an effective way to govern. So the question will be, can Donald Trump leave behind the campaign he had, which was really populist, nationalist, a lot of demagoguery, and convert to something that's more effective? He needs Paul Ryan to do that. And if he's smart, he will take advantage of the fact that he has this Republican Congress to get things done.
But you're suggesting that he should then not run on the immigration, not govern, fulfill some of the promises of immigration and trade? How do you do that when you just won an election on?
Well, it's not going to be very easy, but he also has promised that he's going to salvage the American economy. And you can't do that if all of a sudden you slap 35% tariffs on Mexican goods.
But I assume, Kim, that maybe he can, let's take immigration, okay? He's got to do something.
Yes, he does.
Okay, because he promised it. Maybe he doesn't have to build the wall or a real wall. He could build a virtual wall or something like that. But he's got to do something on that, even though I don't support the policy. But he ran on it.
Exactly. And I do disagree. I think he's got to. All those counties that John Brabender was just talking about, that's why they went to vote for him. So he's got to fulfill that promise. But, you know, I think immigration is a good example of how that's become a more sophisticated issue as time has gone by.
Even Trump has modified his position.
He has. And the addition to it, since we've had domestic terrorism attacks, of a security aspect of it as well, and the idea that you need to maybe screen people more carefully. And look, even the Republicans that were part of the Gang of Eight bill, they had begun to come around. All of those Republican presidential candidates had got to the same position to a certain degree, where they were all saying you got to have security first, some level of a new security focus on the border. So maybe it's not a wall, but he's going to have to do something along those lines.
Something to show that he is trying at least to get to stop illegal immigration. What about where's the other common ground? Where's some common ground, Joe?
Look, I think if Trump is smart, he'll go to House Republicans, Senate Republicans, look at the better way. This is Paul Ryan's reform agenda across energy, healthcare, tax reform. There's a lot of consensus within the Republican caucus around these ideas, and if Trump can claim them as his own and rack up some big early wins in terms of economic revival, I think it'll make for a successful presidency.
I assume you don't disagree with that.
No, I don't disagree with that. But I mean, if he decides that he got elected because he's going to shut down trade with Mexico and China, he's dead in the water, and the markets will punish him for that. I mean, there's a reason why the markets sold off Tuesday night, and that's because of particularly his trade agenda.
Yeah, but they've gone way back up since then. They're almost at a record.
And I think that was
bank stocks,
that was the shot
stocks
across the bow to say, if you try this, capital is going to flee the country.
All right, James, what do you think about the potential is, particularly in the Senate, where you only have 52 votes? As you know, that's a tough body to get business done with. What would you come out of the block? What do you think they're going to come out of the blocks with?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism on tax reform, deregulation. This is something where Republicans in the Congress and Trump see eye to eye. You can get some big wins here, get the economy growing. Yes, I think Trump needs to learn from those in the Congress, but I think they have things to learn from him as far as how you market an idea. Mitch McConnell, as far as I can tell, has not said anything about that Paul Ryan Better Way agenda. Now, Mitch McConnell, we have to thank him because he is great at stopping bad things from happening in Washington, and a big bad thing he stopped was Merrick Garland joining the Supreme Court. Now, though, I think maybe he should do some listening in terms of how Trump can drive an idea forward and think about playing more offense now, because I think that's the opportunity they have for reform.
All right, well, I'm betting Mitch McConnell's not building that wall quite the way that Trump imagines, but we'll see.
Well,
still ahead.
You know, there are fences, maybe you build them a little higher.
All right, still ahead. Democrats, pollsters, and pundits all reeling from Tuesday's election outcome. So what went wrong for Hillary Clinton, and how did so many people miss the signs?
We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead.
Hillary Clinton Wednesday conceding the presidential race to Donald Trump. Her loss, a stunning defeat for Democrats and an outcome most pollsters and pundits did not see coming. So what went wrong for Clinton and how did the polls miss it? Doug Schoen is a Democratic pollster and Fox News contributor. So Doug, was this a personal defeat for Mrs. Clinton, or was this something larger for the Democratic Party?
I think it was both. It was certainly a defeat for Secretary Clinton. She was seen to have an unenthusiastic base of support that never got over 50% and ended up around 47, 48%. It's also a defeat, Paul, for the Democratic Party. The party is now leaderless. It lacks a message. And with the prospective nomination of Keith Ellison to lead the Democratic National Committee,
Congressman from Minnesota,
who is certainly on the far left of the Democratic Party, as I see it. That is a direction that is, I think, antithetical to the way the electorate voted this Tuesday.
But the Democratic Party, a lot of them people are blaming Secretary Clinton. They're saying, you know, the mistake was you went with somebody who was old. Let's face it, a lot of Democrats are saying that. Uninspiring, not charismatic.
Right.
Continued the status quo,
Sure.
No big message. So it was her personal defeat, not a larger Democratic
Well,
defeat.
it was, because if you look at the Senate elections with the Republicans keeping the Senate, if you look at the House elections where the losses, which had been projected to be 15 to 20 seats or more for the Republicans, were I think 6 if I have my numbers correct, Paul, I think this was a complete repudiation of the party that I belong to, and now the party appears potentially to be moving further left, which I think is a profound mistake.
Well, there was, after 2012, a lot of talk about what the so-called coalition of the ascendant, as
Right.
the journalists talked about it. It was the Obama coalition.
Right.
It was minorities. It was young people. It was women. That this was the demographic future for America, and therefore a permanent majority, more or less, as permanent as things get in politics,
Sure.
for Democrats. What happened? The coalition of the ascendant kind of vanished.
Well,
was it a personal coalition for Obama, principally?
I think it was a personal coalition for Obama. The other side of it is what got me interested in the Democratic Party was that it was an inclusive party that stood for a social safety net and a strong assertion of American values overseas. That's largely gone. It is now a party of redistribution and, frankly, retrenchment. Paul, I see the Democratic Party as really now, as I suggested, leaderless and looking for a message while it lurches left.
So you're saying that coalition just couldn't sustain itself without President Obama at the top of the ticket?
Precisely so. And white working class voters, which flocked to Donald Trump, are an essential part of that coalition, was part of the coalition when I worked for Bill Clinton, and was absent for the Democrats Tuesday.
So, and how much of it was economically based?
I think the movement against Hillary Clinton and against Barack Obama was economically based, because that white working class has seen
No income increase.
precisely wage stagnation, underemployment, some increase in unemployment, but the larger American dream is largely gone for them. Their kids aren't going to do better than them. There is real difficulty financing education, retirement, and health care, and they were looking for a new approach, which Trump offered.
It's fascinating to look at the red and blue map of the states, right? And you've got the West Coast, kind of prosperous, California, Oregon, Washington. Then you've got the East, the Northeast, where you also have higher income folks, and certainly in the cities, which have been doing fine.
Yes.
And do you think that the Democrats listen too much to the voices in those parts of the country instead of in middle America, where that's where Trump won the election, from Florida all the way across to the Mountain West.
Undeniably, the Democrats have listened to both coasts, Washington, New York, to the exclusion of what I would call the real America, which is working class.
Now, they're also real Americans on the coast.
I understand, and I don't mean that they're not real, and I'm certainly part of that class proudly and unabashedly. But you know what? You can't run a party based on New York, Washington, and Los Angeles with a little Silicon Valley thrown in. It doesn't work, and it's not representative.
All right. Now, in the Democratic response, you talked about Keith Ellison maybe to the DNC, but there's also some choices that Democrats in the Senate in particular have to make. Some people will want to say, let's do to President Trump what Republicans did to President Obama in 2010. Reject, 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 and we'll have a big wave election. Smart?
I don't think so. I think Democrats have to be true to their values, but support things like a big infrastructure program. I don't think that the Democrats can succeed by just saying no to Donald Trump, particularly where there's going to be a fix or a replacement of Obamacare. For the Democrats just to say no is to potentially abrogate all responsibility and all influence in the country.
So do a big tax reform for infrastructure deal and help them fix Obamacare.
Right, but do things that Trump has said that he likes that Democrats want, like getting rid of carried interest.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Doug Schoen.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for being here. Still ahead, Democrats are reeling from their White House loss and failure to retake the Senate. So where does the party go from here? And what lessons should it learn from Tuesday's defeat?
That's the way politics works sometimes. We try really hard to persuade people that we're right. And then people vote. And then if we lose, we learn from our mistakes, we do some reflection, we lick our wounds, we brush ourselves off, we get back in the arena.
President Obama Wednesday reacting to Hillary Clinton's unexpected loss and promising some reflection from Democrats on the election outcome. So what lessons will they learn from Tuesday's defeat? We're back with Kim Strassel, Joe Rago, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, and James Freeman. So, Joe, I thought that was a very gracious set of remarks by the president, as Hillary Clinton's were. On the other hand, I have a hard time thinking that he reacted so graciously in the privacy of Tuesday night. And I think that it's really going to be interesting to see how Democrats respond. What do you make of their reaction so far?
Well, I don't think they're exactly taking President Obama's advice right there, which was pretty wise. I mean, they're blaming racism, sexism, xenophobia, fear of change.
But don't forget Jim
Comey.
Jim Comey, sure.
The FBI director.
But, you know, I think there was a certain complacency in the Democratic Party. I think they moved too far left, too fast, then the country was ready to go, and you get a reaction like Donald Trump from that.
But why, Mary, if you're the Democrats, wouldn't you say that, in fact, you know what, Comey did meddle in this election. He threw 11 days in, he had that issued that letter to Congress that re-emphasized her ethical problems, the emails. So yeah, Comey is to blame.
Well, I think it's natural that they're trying to find somebody to blame, but they have to go forward. I mean, they have to figure out what went wrong. And if they hang it all on Comey, they're not going to learn the lessons of this election. I think one of the big mistakes they made is this idea of income equality. They put all of their emphasis on redistribution. And, you know, the United States has never been a country that believes as a nation that you should covet your neighbor's goods. Rather, we believe that, hey, I can do better myself. And so the idea, that sort of very European idea that if someone's doing well, I have to get what they have, is not something that flies in the United States. And I think that's the lesson of this, that they should stop focusing on income equality and start focusing on expansion and growth.
Well, I would agree with you, but if the real problem with the income distribution preoccupation is the policies to get there hurt growth, and then you don't get any income growth. And that's what happens. You get average working people who say, hey, this isn't helping me.
And I think
greater disparity.
And I think the results of this election show that Americans understand that.
What do you think of Doug Schoen's comments that the Democrats seem to be moving left, and that's nuts?
Yeah, it is nuts because, look, Hillary Clinton's loss did not begin a week ago when James Comey said what he said. They began 8 years ago when Barack Obama began not just the policies that he was putting forward, but also the manner in which he governed, in which he issued executive...
Okay. All right, fair enough, and I agree with you, but here's the thing you'll get back from all the left, Kim. It's, well, if that's right, then why has President Obama got a 54% approval rating? And
because it isn't this anger out there that you feel and see among the voters, which put Donald Trump into the White House, is a reflection or reaction to his policies, the economy he's created, the Washington he's created, style of governance they've created, and many voters may not exactly tag him as the person who did all that, but in fact he was the guy who did all that.
Well, they like him personally.
A cult
They
of
like him
personality
and
does
that's
not
fine.
transfer to the next candidate. It's a cult of personality around him.
But it's what he's done to the economy and what he's done to his party. Look, 8 years ago, 250 plus Democrats in the House. Today, 190 something. Filibuster-proof Senate. Today, managed to blow their best chance they're going to have in cycles to take back the Senate. Utter wipeout at the state level. They've got 15 governorships.
And only 30 state legislatures.
Yeah, down from
60.
60 and down from 29 governorships when he took over. This has been Barack Obama's legacy to his party, which are policies and a governing style that the American public has rejected.
James, what do you think of the strategy that we talked about with Doug, which is the rejectionist strategy, try to win a Tea Party-style victory in reverse in 2018?
No, that doesn't work for the Democrats, given all the Senate seats they have to defend in Trump states in 2018. You're talking about 10 seats where Trump won 50% or more. So that is not an option for them if they want to grow their caucus in the Senate, for example, and have a successful 2018. But more generally, you can't be indifferent and hostile to job creation and be a national political party. That's what we have the Green Party for. I also think, we've learned in this election, identity politics don't work as well as the Democrats thought they did. Hillary Clinton got a smaller share of the female vote than Barack Obama did in 2008 or 2012. So what they ought to be thinking is, how do we talk to most of America that wants economic growth? And I can think of one elected Democrat, Gina Raimondo, governor of Rhode Island, who actually is making growth a priority.
Freeman for Raimondo in 2020. All right, thank you. When we come back, he's promised to make jump-starting the economy job one. So can President-elect Trump deliver on his plan for 25 million new jobs and 4% growth? That was President-elect Donald Trump in his victory speech Wednesday, promising to jumpstart the economy with a big investment in infrastructure and setting an ambitious goal of doubling the nation's growth rate. So can President Trump deliver on those promises with an economic agenda he ran on? So, Kenny?
Yeah, I think he can do it. I mean, first of all, I think he should keep in mind that Congress is not going to give him a blank check for infrastructure spending. I mean, if he thinks that this is just going to be a big spending spree and that's how he's going to get growth going, I think he's going to have to learn a few things on his first few days in the job. But the other problem he has, again, is this problem where he promised increased protectionism. I mean, you can't tell the American public that you're going to cut taxes and put, again, 35% tariff on goods coming from Mexico. Tariffs are taxes. That's a tax increase.
All right, but I agree with you. If he cut taxes, big corporate tax reform, general tax cut, spent some money on roads and bridges, fixed health care and Obamacare, deregulated the large swaths of the economy that this current administration has regulated, isn't that going to be a growth booster?
That's definitely a growth booster, but I really hope that if he thinks he has to answer for his attacks on NAFTA, what he will do is open NAFTA up, say, I looked at it, I improved the verification process, do something cosmetic, but not touch what is fundamentally a very competitive North American economy, which he would basically take down if he tries to either force a renegotiation or Mexico doesn't agree and then he rips it up.
James, how worried are you about the protectionist Trump? Because I think that actually trade is one of his core convictions.
Yeah, it's a big concern. That's the big concern. And I look at trade as what's working in the economy. It's the tax and regulation making U.S. businesses non-competitive that isn't working. But you have to find a way to work with him on these issues. And maybe there's some common ground in terms of let's not put up a tariff wall, but let's tell the Chinese no more forcing our companies to do joint ventures with their government-backed firms, which then steal our intellectual property. You know, maybe there are liberating trade issues where you can find common ground with him, and that's what I'd look for. And
Joe, you're seeing inside the Trump transition this tension. I mean, between the growth elements, the tax cutters, and the deregulators on the other hand, and then the folks for whom trade is the predominant issue. Guys like Dan D'Amico, former the Nucor
Steel CEO. Yeah, I mean, it's not really a team of rivals so much as a team of adversaries. It's hard to see how David Malpass, for example, former Bear Stearns economist who's heavily involved with the transition, and Peter Navarro, an economist who's written a lot about trade with China and the effects on the economy. There's not a lot of overlap there.
No, they just disagree fundamentally on trade policy.
So the question is whether this is going to be incoherent or Trump is setting up a creative tension that might lead to some kind of accommodation, but it's hard to see it right now.
It's interesting, Kim. It's going to be interesting to see who gets the predominant roles inside the White House and also inside the cabinet, and then how this plays out. I think this is going to be the fundamental drama on economic policy for at least for the first year of the administration.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, it's going to be the biggest question, the only question, and which side wins. We're going to have an early indication of that based on who those cabinet positions are and based on where other people are in key senior advisory roles, etc., to see who's won the upper hand on that debate.
One of the things that's also, I think, significant, Mary, a president has a fair bit of unilateral power that Congress has ceded him over the years, ceded presidents over the years, to do things like slap on retaliatory tariffs or declare China to be a currency manipulator. And of course, if he goes to Mexico and says, I'll reopen, I want to renegotiate NAFTA or I'll pull out, how does Mexico respond?
Well, look back at what happened when the U.S. was not holding up to its obligations on trucking. Mexico went down the list of imports that it got from the U.S. in the agriculture sector and jacked up the tariffs on all of those things. U.S. agriculture was screaming until finally
Mary.
The U.S. gave in.
Thank you very much. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week. Time now for our hits and misses of the week, Kim.
A huge miss to the nation's college administrators for coddling all those snowflakes out there with counseling sessions and cry-ins and Play-Doh and therapy dogs to help them in their moment of grief over a Trump election. I'd much prefer that they were giving some money to civics classes and reminding everyone that they're very fortunate to live in a 40% of the world that actually has fair and free and open democracy.
All right, Kim. Joe.
Paul, it's a brave new weed in California, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Maine, which voted this week to legalize recreational marijuana. Afraid to say this is a miss because the costs have been higher, as it were, than advertised in Colorado and other states in terms of law enforcement, lost productivity on the